Distinguished viewers, we are witnessing a moment of profound diplomatic significance unfolding in Beijing this week. For the first time in 8 years, a Canadian Prime Minister has arrived in the People's Republic of China, not as a supplicant seeking favors, but as the leader of a sovereign nation charting a course toward strategic independence. Mark Carney's visit to China represents far more than a trade mission. It represents the deliberate recalibration of Canada's place in a rapidly shifting global order. A recalibration made necessary by circumstances beyond Ottawa's control, yet executed with remarkable clarity of purpose. This is a story about optionality, about resilience, and about the quiet determination of a nation that has decided dependency is no longer an acceptable condition of prosperity. The context surrounding this visit cannot be overstated. Canada finds itself at a crossroads that would have been unimaginable just 2 years ago. The United States, for decades the anchor of Canadian economic security, has become a source of profound uncertainty under the current administration. President Donald Trump's decision to impose a 35% across-the-board tariff on Canadian goods, alongside additional levies on steel, aluminum, and lumber, has fundamentally altered the calculus in Ottawa. These are not the actions of a strategic partner. These are the actions of a government that views its closest neighbor and ally as an economic adversary to be coerced rather than collaborated with. Prime Minister Carney inherited a trade relationship in crisis, one where the rules of engagement had been rewritten unilaterally, leaving Canadian industries exposed and Canadian workers vulnerable. The question facing his government was not whether to respond, but how to respond in a manner that protects Canadian interests while preserving the dignity of the nation. The answer arrived in the form of a red carpet reception at Beijing Capital International Airport on the evening of January 14th. The symbolism was unmistakable. President Xi Jinping personally invited Carney to China, and the Chinese Communist Party deployed the full ceremonial apparatus of a state visit to welcome him. This was not standard diplomatic protocol for a middle power trading partner. This was a statement. Beijing understands the language of geopolitics better than most, and the message being sent was clear to anyone paying attention. When the United States pushes its allies away, China stands ready to welcome them in. The careful choreography of this reception, from the placement of cameras to the seniority of officials present on the tarmac, communicated to the world that Canada matters, that Canadian leadership is respected, and that Ottawa now has alternatives where previously there were none. The historical context makes this reception even more remarkable. The relationship between Canada and China collapsed in 2018 when Canadian authorities arrested Meng Wanzhou, a senior executive of the Chinese telecommunications firm Huawei, on an extradition warrant from the United States. China retaliated by detaining 2 Canadian citizens, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spalvor, holding them for nearly 3 years on espionage charges widely viewed as politically motivated. Canada stood with the United States during that crisis, absorbing significant economic and diplomatic costs in the name of alliance solidarity. The question that haunts this current visit is a simple one. Where was that solidarity when Canada needed it most? The Trump administration has offered Canada nothing but contempt. While Ottawa stood firm on principle during the Huawei affair, enduring Chinese trade embargoes and the imprisonment of its citizens, Washington has responded to Canadian loyalty with tariffs, with insults, and with repeated threats to annex Canadian territory as the 51st American state. This is not the behavior of a reliable partner. It is the behavior of a bully who has mistaken patience for weakness. Prime Minister Carney understands this distinction with the clarity of someone who spent decades navigating the world's central banks and financial institutions. On the second day of the visit, Prime Minister Carney sat across from Premier Li Qiang in the Great Hall of the People, one of the most iconic settings in Chinese political life. Premier Li described the moment as a new starting point in bilateral relations, emphasizing that both nations should deepen cooperation to protect multilateralism and free trade. Let us pause on that language for a moment. Multilateralism and free trade are principles that Canada has championed for generations. They are principles that the current American administration has actively undermined through unilateral tariffs and aggressive protectionism. China, for all its internal contradictions and authoritarian governance, is positioning itself as the defender of the international trading system that Washington appears determined to dismantle. This is a remarkable inversion, and Prime Minister Carney is navigating it with pragmatic skill. The centerpiece of the visit thus far has been the signing of a memorandum of understanding on energy cooperation. Canada's Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, Tim Hodgson, stood alongside his Chinese counterpart and formalized an agreement that recognizes Canada as an important potential partner in responsibly produced and reliable global oil, liquefied natural gas, and liquefied petroleum gas supply. The significance of this document extends far beyond its immediate commercial implications. For years, 96% of Canadian crude oil exports have flowed to the United States. That dependency created a structural vulnerability that American policymakers have now chosen to exploit. The completion of the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline in May of 2024 changed the strategic equation fundamentally. Canada now has the infrastructure to ship energy resources to Asian markets, and China has made it abundantly clear that it wants more Canadian energy. Consider the numbers carefully. In 2024, Canada exported approximately $2.4 billion worth of crude oil to China, representing just 2% of total Canadian oil exports. In the first half of 2025, energy exports to China surged by 81%, driven by increased shipments through the Trans Mountain Pipeline. By March of 2025, Canadian crude exports to China reached a record high of 353,000 barrels per day. This is not a marginal shift. This is the beginning of a fundamental reorientation of Canadian energy markets. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil, consuming more than 10 million barrels per day. The Chinese government has explicitly told Canadian officials that they view Canada as a reliable trading partner, one that does not use energy as a tool of coercion. That statement is a direct rebuke to the volatility and unpredictability of American energy policy under the current administration. Minister Hodgson confirmed that China has made it clear they want more Canadian products, and that they are looking for reliable trading partners. The energy agreement also addresses liquefied natural gas, a sector where Canada holds enormous potential. The LNG Canada facility in Kitimat, British Columbia, began operations in 2024, providing Canada with the capacity to export natural gas to Asian markets for the first time at scale. China is an investor in that project, and Minister Hodgson confirmed during the visit that Chinese firms are expected to invest in Canada's second major LNG facility as well. Canada produces the lowest carbon intensity liquefied natural gas in the world, a competitive advantage that aligns perfectly with China's stated ambitions to reduce emissions while maintaining energy security. Beyond energy, the visit has focused heavily on agriculture, a sector that has borne the brunt of retaliatory Chinese tariffs imposed in 2025. After Canada followed the United States in implementing a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, Beijing responded by targeting Canadian canola, pork, and seafood exports. These tariffs have caused significant economic pain, particularly in Saskatchewan and other agricultural provinces. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe traveled to Beijing alongside Prime Minister Carney, a signal of how critical these negotiations are to Canadian farmers and producers. While no breakthrough on tariffs has been announced as of this writing, the tone of discussions has been described as productive. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand stated that negotiations are continuing and that all stressed sectors of the Canadian economy are being brought into the conversation. The very fact that these discussions are taking place at the highest levels of government represents progress that would have been impossible 2 years ago. Prime Minister Carney also met with Chinese business leaders from sectors including clean technology, financial technology, and energy. The Prime Minister engaged with executives from contemporary Amperex Technology, the world's largest electric vehicle battery manufacturer, China National Petroleum Corporation, Alibaba Ordaput, and Primavera Capital Group, among others. These meetings are about attracting investment to Canada, about positioning Canadian industries as competitive destinations for capital in sectors critical to the 21st century economy. The Carney government is not simply seeking to sell more commodities. It is seeking to integrate Canada into global supply chains in ways that create high-value jobs and technological capacity within Canadian borders. Prime Minister Carney's government has set an explicit goal to double Canada's non-United States exports by 2035, reaching approximately $600 billion annually. That target requires cultivating new markets and deepening existing partnerships across Asia, Europe, and Latin America. China, as the world's second largest economy, is central to that diversification strategy. What makes this visit particularly significant from a diplomatic perspective is the broader strategic context. Canada is not pursuing this relationship in isolation. This is one component of a comprehensive diversification strategy designed to reduce Canada's economic reliance on a single market that has proven itself to be unreliable under current American leadership. This is not anti-American policy. This is pro-Canadian policy. It is the recognition that no sovereign nation should allow itself to become hostage to the political whims of any other nation, no matter how powerful. What is undeniable is that Canada has demonstrated to the world that it is no longer content to be taken for granted. The Carney government has signaled that Canada will pursue its interests with determination and pragmatism, that it will build relationships where relationships serve the national good, and that it will not accept dependency as a permanent condition. The welcome in Beijing was not just a reception for a prime minister. It was recognition of a nation that has chosen sovereignty over subservience, resilience over reliance, and strategic independence over strategic paralysis. The United States may choose to see Canada as insignificant, but the rest of the world is watching, and the rest of the world sees something very different. They see a nation that understands its value, a nation that will not be coerced, and a nation that has options. That is the diplomatic significance of this visit, and that is the legacy Prime Minister Carney is building for Canada on the world stage.